Let's stay with this story then for our interview of the morning. And just how important then is France's Yellow Vest movement? Has it lifted the lid on bubbling discontent across Western societies, with ordinary people believing the system no longer works for them? Protests, of course, have now cropped up as far afield as Canada, as well in Belgium, the Netherlands and the UK. So does this movement have global reach, or is it fading away? Here in Paris, officials say only 2,000 people turned out to the streets on Saturday, compared with 8,000 the week before. Well, to discuss it all then, we're joined here by Agnès Poirier, a journalist based between London and Paris. Good morning to you. Thanks very much for joining us. First of all, let me just ask you that then. With those numbers, less and less people coming out in the streets, is this a movement that's dying?
No, I don't think so. I think we'll hear from the Yellow Vest in the next few weeks or months. It's probably the end of a cycle, the end of a phase. And hopefully it's the end of a violent phase. You know, we've got the winter, we've got the looming Christmas celebrations. Also, 5 Saturdays in a row, people are a bit tired, perhaps, even the Yellow Vest with all their energy. And also, you know, it's a protest like unlike any other we've had in recent years or even decades, in the sense that it's not organised, it's leaderless, and we now see emerging different fringes, different, you know, and I think it's going to split. And you might get, you know, you have the angry Yellow Vest, I think they're calling themselves, and then you have the free Yellow Vest. And so basically in the end, it's probably down to who is ready to organise itself and go and meet the French government and start negotiating, for instance, and those who just want to protest and wreak havoc, perhaps in the centre of Paris, and refuse to actually engage in any talks whatsoever.
Yeah, that clearly has been one of the problems, hasn't it? Because they don't have a formal leadership. Now, let me ask you, how seriously do you take the ideas that we just heard in that report of this kind of citizens' referendum? Do you think that could be a good way to try and to breach that frustration between the people in the streets and the government?
Well, if you look at the demands, I mean, it's interesting because in the last 5 weeks or so, we've looked at their demands vented on the internet. And, God, it's such a various and diverse set of demands. So the latest one, the ability for citizens to approve or remove laws or politicians. We know this. I mean, we haven't done this in France, but it might work at a very local, you know, level in a village. But very often, this referendum are not about the question that is asked. I mean, we could talk about Brexit, which is an exercise in referendum. We can talk about Italy recently, you know, when Matteo Renzi actually had to resign of a reform of the Senate. So, you know, very often we all regret having pressed the button referendum either at a national or regional level. And it's also, it reeks of, you know, for me, it's quite demagogic and quite anti-democratic as well. But if you look at, I mean, they've got so many different demands, really. There's a majority of them that want to bring back the death penalty, for instance. Of course, they want Macron to resign, but some of them also don't want speed limits on roads. So they will perhaps have to agree among themselves first.
Indeed, very sweeping list of demands. I know you're absolutely right about that. You mentioned then Brexit, and I wanted to ask you about that because, of course, you're based in the United Kingdom. And I have heard it being argued that some of the sentiments that we're seeing here in France, this kind of anti-establishment feeling, is similar to the frustrations that motivated the Brexit vote. Do you agree that there's a similar kind of discontent in France and in the UK?
Well, it's easy to see a connection. It's also easy to see a connection with Trump voters or even with Italian voters, because, you know, a lot of people in France think, OK, well, in 5 years' time, we'll have the Liga, the French Liga, the National Front, or the Rassemblement National, Marine Le Pen's party, and with the radical left, perhaps La France Insoumise with Jean-Luc Mélenchon. And, you know, that's possible. What is important is for this discontent to express itself democratically. And we've got European elections in a few months' time. So now there's a talk that perhaps some Yellow Vest should try this exercise in democracy and, you know, present a list of members to be elected at the European Parliament. That could be a way forward.
And that sounds like that would do something to perhaps make it a little clearer to us about precisely what the political ideology of this movement is, because I know we've discussed it a lot on the channel. Is it a right-wing movement? Is it a left-wing movement? Is it neither of the two? What's your sense on what's the political background of these people?
Well, you know, we now have a few figures. We know that I think it's the French newspaper Le Monde that published some figures that almost half of the Yellow Vests have voted for Marine Le Pen's party, for instance. We also know that if you compare, that's what Le Monde did, they compiled the 50 demands of the Yellow Vest, and it corresponded to equally to Marine Le Pen's political programme and Jean-Luc Mélenchon's political programme. That is to say, a sort of convergence of radicalities, if you'd like. So, you know, and actually, if they have a Yellow Vest list and delegates for the European elections, they will actually be bad news for both Marine Le Pen and Jean-Luc Mélenchon. So, and both of them have tried to serve, to not hijack, but really to capitalize on the Yellow Vest, and they didn't manage to do this, because a lot of Yellow Vests said no, we don't want to have anything to do with you. So, but it makes it, you know, it's good for democracy. It's an exercise in democracy, as long as it's within democratic, you know, a process. Then it's good news. Debate is always good.
Indeed, so I suppose all eyes are if there'll be fresh protests next weekend, and indeed all eyes, as well as you mentioned, on the European elections as we look a little bit bigger at the Yellow Vest. Thank you very much indeed, Agnès Poirier there, a journalist based between London and Paris, giving us her analysis this morning on that movement here in France and indeed in parts of Europe as well.